Okay, guys, this is probably like take 300, let's be honest. So Miss Neal and I are going to try to put together some video messages and video lessons for you from time to time. Today I'm coming to you to do lesson 13 for Out of the Dust for your ELA time today. So we are going to work through these videos the best that we can. I know it's not what we expected. I know it's not what we want, but here we are. We're going to get through it together. We're going to do it together. If you have any questions about anything, just always reach out to us through that email or remind. To always look at the Padlet, see what's going on. Your email is going to be the first form of communication that we use to reach out to you. So with that being said, let's really kind of jump into it. Hopefully you guys got an opportunity to see the announcements today. I hope that you guys enjoyed them. I know that myself and the other teachers having a really great time doing them for you. So let's just jump into Out of the Dust now. So lesson 13 is where we are going to read a speech and we're going to determine that speech's message specifically. But let's just real quick, last time that we met and we worked on lesson 12 together, we read chapter or a playlist, if you will, Summer of 1934. It was a pretty deep chapter. Could even say that it's a little emotional chapter, right? A lot of things happened. There was the incident with the kerosene, and Billy Joe burned her hands, and Ma passed away. There was a lot of things that took place during that, and I don't want to not go back to it, but we need to look at a few of the other things. But the things that we did was that we determined identified some of the actual historical events that took place. We made those connections between those historical events that took place during the Dust Bowl. I know that a few of you guys brought up the references that were made with the New Deal. That's been really heavily kind of put into play for us in this particular book, is the Dust Bowl and how they're going to get out of the Dust Bowl or survive the Dust Bowl. So a lot of you guys are able to make those connections with what you learned in 5th grade in terms of the Great Depression. So that's where we are on that. So for today, we're going to read On Drought Conditions, which of course is a speech delivered by Franklin D. Roosevelt. And then right after that, we're going to write an argument that includes text evidence. And remember, when we say an argument, we're developing a claim and we're working through the reasons for that claim and the evidence to support that claim. So here's some of the things that you're going to need for this lesson right now, and that is going to be on page 20. You are going to see the excerpt from the speech that President Roosevelt gave, and again, that is on page 20 of your purple folder. But you are also going to need, for your writing today, you are going to need the argument, sentence stems, and transition words or phrases handout that you will see on page 3. I'm just going to write that up there for you. On page 3 of your purple folder. You will need these two things in order to develop your read through the text, but then also develop your argument later in the lesson. So here's where we begin. What you're going to do is you're going to follow along in your text as you listen to me read Franklin D. Roosevelt and the delivery of his speech. What I would like you to do is, while I read, I want you to work through some of those reading strategies that we've learned, the unravel strategies. I want you to number those paragraphs, underline some of those keywords, I want you really digging into the paragraph, because then you're going to dig into it on your own after I read it. So here we go. You're on page 20 of your purple folder. I'm going to give you just a second to readjust yourself and make sure that you are where you are. So if you need to pause the video at this point, go right ahead and do that, and then you can pick back up and you will hear me start to read. So here we go. An excerpt from On Drought Conditions, Franklin D. Roosevelt, September 6, 1936. I have been on a journey of husbandry. I went primarily to see at first-hand conditions in the drought states, to see how effectively federal and local authorities are taking care of pressing problems of relief, and also how they are to work together to defend the people of this country against the effects of future droughts. I saw drought devastation in 9 states. I talked with families who had lost their wheat crop, lost their corn crop, lost their livestock, lost to water in their well, lost their garden, and came through to the end of the summer without $1 of cash resources, facing a winter without feed or food, facing a planting season without seed to put in the ground. That was the extreme case, but there are thousands and thousands of families on Western farms who share the same difficulties. I saw cattlemen who, because of lack of grass or lack of winter feed, have been compelled to sell all but their breeding stock and will need help to carry even these through the coming winter. I saw livestock kept alive only because water had been brought to them long distances in tank cars. I saw other farm families who have not lost everything, but who, because they have made only partial crops, must have some form of help if they are to continue farming next spring. I shall never forget the fields of wheat, so blasted by the heat that they cannot be harvested. I shall never forget field after field of corn stunted, earless, and stripped of leaves, for what the sun left the grasshoppers took. I saw brown pastures which would not keep a cow on 50 acres. Yet I would not have you think for a single minute that there is permanent disaster in these drought regions, or that the picture I saw meant depopulating these areas. No cracked earth, no blistering sun, no burning wind, no grasshoppers are a permanent match for the indomitable American farmers and stockmen and their wives and children who have carried on through desperate days and inspire us with their self-reliance, their tenacity, and their courage. It was their father's task to take homes. It is their task to keep those homes. It is our task to help them with their fight. First, let me talk for a minute about this autumn and the coming winter. We have the option, in case of families who need actual subsistence, of putting them on the dole or putting them to work. They do not want to go on the dole, and they are 1000% right. We agree, therefore, that we must put them to work for a decent wage. And when we reach that decision, we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Because of these families will earn enough by working, not only to subsist themselves, but to buy food for their stock and seed for next year's planting. Into the scheme of things, there fit, of course, the government lending agencies, which next year, as in the past, will help with production loans. Every governor with whom I have talked is in full accord with this program of doing work for these farm families. Just as every governor agrees that the individual states will take care of their unemployables, but that the cost of employing those who are entirely able and willing to work must be borne by the federal government. If then we know, as we do today, the approximate number of farm families who will require some form of work relief from now on through the winter, we face the question of what kind of work they should do. Let me make it clear that this is not a new question, because it has already been answered to a greater or less extent in every one of the drought communities. Beginning in 1934, when we also had serious drought conditions, the state and federal governments cooperated in planning a large number of projects, many of them directly aimed at the alleviation of future drought conditions. In accordance with that program, literally thousands of ponds or small reservoirs had been built in order to supply water for stock and to lift the level of the underground water to protect walls from going dry. Thousands of wells have been drilled or deepened. Community lakes have been created and irrigation projects are being pushed. Water conservation by means such as these is being expanded as a result of this new drought all through the Great Plains area, the Western Corn Belt, and in the states that lie further south. In the Middle West, water conservation is not so pressing a problem. Here, the work projects run more to soil erosion control and the building of farm-to-market roads. Spending like this is not waste. It would spell future waste if we did not spend for such things now. These emergency work projects provide money to buy food and clothing for the winter. They keep the livestock on the farm, they provide seed for a new crop, and best of all, they will conserve soil and water in the future in those areas most frequently hit by drought. If, for example, in some local area the water table continues to drop and the topsoil to blow away, the land values will disappear with the water and the soil. People on the farms will drift into the nearby cities. The cities will have no farm trade, and the workers in the city factories and stores will have no jobs. Property values in the cities will decline. If, on the other hand, the farms within that area remains as farms with better water supply and no erosion, the farm population will stay on the land and prosper, and the nearby cities will prosper too. Property values will increase instead of disappearing. That is why it is worth our while as a nation to spend money in order to save money. So that's a lot. The very first part of it kind of resonated a little bit with me just because of everything that we're going through right now, not just with COVID-19, but also with the tornadoes that just recently happened in our area. I think of the speeches that we have heard from not only our president now, but also from our mayors and our governor and the different other leaders that we have within our state and our country that are just really kind of trying to motivate us and encourage us that everything's going to be okay. I feel like the beginning of this speech really does that. And then I feel like the second page of the speech, it really speaks to what the president is trying to put into action to make sure that this doesn't happen again. What are your first thoughts of this speech? Think about that for just a second. I hate that we can't raise hands here. So I'm going to pause for just a second and then come back to you. So I want you to just think about what you think about when you read this speech and if there's something that you connect with your own life with what's going on right now. Okay, here we go. So hopefully you've thought about that for just a second, just to kind of get an overall idea about the speech and what its purpose was. Primarily because if we go back to what one of our lesson objectives were today is that we're reading his speech and we're determining its message. So I want you to go back now and I want you to reread paragraphs 1 through 6. And of course, if you went through and you numbered those paragraphs with me as you were reading, that should be fairly easy. But what I want you to look for is I want you to look for answering these two questions. How does President Roosevelt's description of the Dust Bowl differ from what we already know about life there? What insight do we gain by hearing the President of the United States offer this description of the region? So you're going back and you're reading and you're looking for clues, okay, on what President Roosevelt's description of the Dust Bowl was and how that is the same to what we already know about the descriptions that we have put into place, as well as what do you gain from hearing it from the President of the United States? I'm going to pause again and give you an opportunity to go back and reread those paragraphs 1 through 6 and complete this. So at this point, you probably want to pause your video and reread those paragraphs, and then I will come back to you in just a second. Okay, we're back. So What did you think? What were some of those insights that you gained from this? Some of the things that I looked at was about halfway down. I'd say paragraph 3. It says the cattleman that he met with cattlemen who, because of lack of grass or lack of winter feed, had to sell a lot of their cattle. But then the very next paragraph down, it gets very descriptive when it says, I shall never forget the fields of wheat so blasted by the heat. They cannot be harvested. I shall never forget field after field of corn stunted, earless, and stripped of leaves. For what the sun left, the grasshoppers took. I saw brown pastures which would not likely keep a cow on 50 acres. So I found a lot of descriptive words there, a lot of descriptive language there that really kind of describes what the Dust Bowl looks like, and almost kind of lets you feel a little bit too there of what the families might be going through when he talks about that they have to sell their cows, that they've lost their gardens, they've lost all their livestock. Kind of gives you a little bit of a feeling too as well, not just a a visual description. I feel like the description is like what we have already known about. We know that earlier in the book, especially in the poem Fields of Flashing Lights, where it's very descriptive in the storm that comes through and then the devastation that that storm leaves. I feel like that particular poem is the first one that comes to mind. So think about other instances in a novel that is the same as some of the descriptions that you see here in the speech. Okay, so we're going to move on to paragraph 7 through 9. So this, of course, is the backside. I really felt that this particular text, the first page, the front page side of it, was very much a description of what life was like during that time, what the devastation was during that time, and then very much the backside was all about what President Roosevelt was proposing that the federal government would do to help people in the drought-stricken areas. So the question is very specific to that. So go ahead and reread paragraphs 7 through 9, which basically is this backside of your text, and think about how you would answer this question. What is President Roosevelt proposing the federal government do to help people in the drought-stricken areas? Go ahead and pause your video at this point. I'm going to pause mine and go ahead and start looking for some of the pieces of evidence that we could use to answer this question. Okay, we're back. So what kind of pieces of evidence did you find in this text that shows you what President Roosevelt is proposing that the government do, the federal government do? The very first thing that I found was at the end of that very top paragraph. It says, into this scheme, it's the last sentence there, it says, into this scheme of things there fit, of course, the government lending agency, which next year, as in the past, will help with production loans. So I really felt like the federal government was going to be helping with production loans whenever I read this particular piece of text over again. It also does go on to say in the very next paragraph, it says, every governor with whom I have talked is in full accord with the program of doing work for these farm families. Just as every governor agrees that the individual states will take care of their unemployables, that means those people who are not able to be employed, but that the cost of employing those who are entirely able and willing to work must be borne by the federal government, which means when he says must be borne, must be kind of given life by the federal government, right? So the federal government is going to do what they can to help those people do those particular, be able to work. So giving that relief. It says in the very next paragraph, I thought that it was very interesting because it shows what President Roosevelt is proposing specifically. It says that beginning in 1934, that's right in the middle of the paragraph there. Take a look. Beginning in 1934, when we also had serious drought conditions, the state and federal governments cooperated in planning a large number of projects, many of them directly aimed at the alleviation of future drought conditions. This is where it goes in to talk about some of those programs to help those bad farming practices. So remember back when, we read through a lot of our other text before, is it talked about, conservation efforts, building the, or planting the trees and making sure to have the farmers, practice their plowing in different directions. All of that types of programs were put into place during that time. So I think that we can kind of get an idea of what that is with that part of the text. Okay. So now let's look at this particular piece of the text. What we're going to do is, while we look through this particular piece of the text, it's wanting us to use context clues to determine the meanings of the bold words and record them in your reading log. So what you're going to want to do is turn to your reading log. And the way that I want you to head your reading logs from now on, since we're going to be working with both Miss Deschamps' class and Miss Neal's class, and I'm going to start doing this, is I want you to just go ahead and head it up instead of numbers. My class understands what I'm talking about here. But instead of numbers, I want you to just head up what lesson you're on. So we're going to head it up with lesson 13 in our reading logs. And what it's asking us to do is to record these bold words in our reading logs, and then we are going to determine the meanings of these bold words. So I'm going to go ahead and write these bold words in my reading log, and I'm going to leave room for myself to write a definition. And that's what I want you guys to do as well. 2 lines maybe in between the words. The 2 words that we have first here are indomitable and tenacity. Okay? So if you need to pause the video at this point in order to get those words written down, go right ahead. All right, here we go. So let's read the excerpt. No cracked earth, no blistering sun, no burning wind, no grasshoppers are a permanent match for the indomitable American farmers and stockmen and their wives and children who have carried on through desperate days and inspire us with their self-reliance, their tenacity, and their courage. Okay. So we need to figure out what the meaning is of these 2 words. Remember, using context clues. What do we know about using context clues? We know that context clues are hints that an author will give us in the writing. Okay? So, and those hints are designed to help us define or understand words. Okay? So take a look at that and look for some context clues for me. All right. So some of the things that I picked up on for indomitable, it says, no cracked earth, no blistering sun, no burning wind, no grasshoppers are a permanent match for the indomitable American farmers and stockmen and their wives and children who have carried on through desperate days. Indomitable. What do you believe the word indomitable might mean here? Well, the first thing that I came up with when I read this was the part where it says, none of these things are any match for the indomitable American farmer. So none of these things are a match for the American farmers. When you think about something that is a match with something else. They're usually kind of going against each other, right? So what is against the American farmer here? Well, all of the problems that they're facing, right? Well, this is no match for these indomitable farmers. So we look at the word indomitable as a word of impossible to subdue or defeat, right? So it is impossible to knock down or defeat these American farmers. So indomitable, what I would put is in mind for a definition would be anything like that. Impossible to defeat or impossible to knock down, right? And then as far as tenacity, let's look at tenacity. That they inspire us with their self-reliance and their tenacity and their courage. So their tenacity and their courage. So tenacity, to me, in this particular case, is more about like the fact that they're able to continue to go through what it is that they're going through, right? That they have that they have a determination, right? So that they're determined, that their self-reliance, that their ability to rely on themselves and to work through this is so inspirational, and that their tenacity or their grit might be another really good word for tenacity here. So I want you to go ahead and use those context clues and come up with your own definition to these two words. I want you to write those down in your reading log. Again, go ahead and pause the video at this point to be able to do that. Take your time with it and get that logged in, and then play on. All right, let's keep moving. We just have a few more things to do. We're going to reread paragraphs 10 through 13 and think about these questions. Why does President Roosevelt want the farmers to remain on their land? And then I want you to find two pieces of text evidence that support your answer. I want you to write them in your notes. So let's go back for just a second. We're going to go into our reading log, and we're going to add these particular questions into our reading log. So I'm going to do that now. If you need to pause, you can pause and do that. But I'm going to write these questions in my reading log, and then I'm going to read those paragraphs 10 through 13, the final portions of the text that we just read, and I'm going to answer these two questions. So if you need to pause now, go ahead and do that, and then I'll be right back with you. So after I read these paragraphs, it was pretty apparent to me that President Roosevelt wants the farmers to remain on their land because he wants the lands to prosper. He wants the farmers to prosper, and the crops and the farming to be a prosperous thing for the country. It needs to be for the country. It says that spending like this is not waste. So he's explaining that this is not wasteful, and he goes on to explain why it is not wasteful. A couple of pieces of text evidence that support this is that it says down in the very last paragraph, and I'll just read it for you. It says, people on the farms will drift into the nearby cities. The cities will have no farm trade, and the workers in the city factories and stores will have no jobs. Okay, so as a result of these things, property values in the cities will decline. If, on the other hand, the farmers within that area remain as farms with better water supply and no erosion, the farm population will stay on the land and prosper, and the nearby cities will prosper too. Property values will increase instead of disappearing. That is why it is worth our while as a nation to spend money in order to save money. So the whole point of this is that if President Roosevelt feels like if we spend money on the front end, then we're actually going to be saving money on the back end, because these particular farms will prosper. It will keep these people out of the cities, and the cities will continue to prosper the way that they are intended to. So all of that, you've answered that question. You have found your two pieces of text evidence. Let's look at something really quickly here. I have been on a journey of husbandry. I went primarily to sea. This is one of the first statements that is made in the very beginning of this text. Husbandry. What does husbandry mean? The first thing that I thought of when I read through this PowerPoint about husbandry, like I didn't even think about using this particular word within this context. So the cultivation and production of edible crops or of animals for food. That's one particular definition, as well as the science of raising crops for food and animals. Careful or thrifty management. So you see these different, that's completely in line with what we're reading, the management of domestic affairs. So I thought that was interesting. It says here, reread the first paragraph of President Roosevelt's speech. Which definition of husbandry applies to how it is used in this particular text? So let's look at that particular paragraph. I'm just going to read it real quick to you. I've been on a journey of husbandry. I went primarily to see at firsthand conditions in the drought states, to see how effectively federal and local authorities are taking care of pressing problems of relief, and also how they are to work together to defend the people of this country against the effects of future droughts. So which definition is most applicable to this particular paragraph? That's what it's asking. Is it number 1, 2, 3, or 4? Go ahead and read through those particular choices, and I'll come back to you in just a second so that we can discuss it. Okay, so I have taken another look at the paragraph. Hopefully you have taken another look at the paragraph at this point. One of the things that is very apparent to me in the paragraph is where it says that President Roosevelt is going to see how effectively federal and local authorities are taking care of pressing problems of the land and or of the relief, and also how they are to work together to defend the people of this country against the effects of future droughts. For me, that spoke to management. That spoke to, the president is going himself. He's on a journey of husbandry, which is to see how effectively federal and local authorities are taking care. So for me, the answer here would be 4, the management of domestic affairs or of resources generally. Hopefully you were thinking along the same lines. If not, maybe you understand now why I chose number 4 there. So here is the meat of what you're going to be doing today, right? So we have done these paragraphs multiple times now. Claim, reasons, evidence, and explanations, right? Your CRE paragraphs. What does President Roosevelt mean when he says it is worth our while as a nation to spend money in order to save money? That's the last sentence in his speech here. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to answer this prompt in your reading log, just like we do any other time. But remember that we are heading our reading log for this lesson as lesson 13. We have our 2 words, indomitable, tenacity. We have our 2 questions. Why does President Roosevelt want the farmers to remain on their land? And now you're going to write this prompt, and then you're going to answer this prompt with a claim, 2 reasons, explanations, 2 pieces of evidence, and explanations as well. So you're going to include a description of what the money would be spent on, and at least 2 reasons why he believes it is a good idea to spend the money. And then, of course, your text should include a direct quotation from the text. That is text evidence. So make sure that you have a direct quotation from the text in your argument, and also make sure that you have clear pieces or clear reasons and explanations with that evidence supporting it. So if you want to stop on this slide, you can, so that maybe you can organize your thoughts with this visual of the claim, the 2 reasons, and the 2 pieces of evidence. But this is your exit ticket today. This is your assignment today for what you need to do. And if you have any questions, reach out to us, let us know. We'll go over this in the next lesson. I will also be pushing out lesson 14 as soon as I can get it recorded. This lesson has taken us roughly about 35 minutes. Considering that this is the first one, hopefully I can work out some of my kinks and speed it up a little bit for you. But this is your exit ticket today. This is what you are doing as your assignment for today in ELA. But just to be able to wrap up this particular lesson, this is what we've done. We have read a speech and examined it closely for meaning, and then you will also write an argument that includes that text evidence. So good luck. Let us know if you need anything, and we're here no matter what.